We're live. All right. So, just for you folks who are the early ones that get to the stream there, I'm just going to give a quick introduction to my guest here, Dennis Pratt. Been really looking forward to actually having this conversation. Dennis is someone who's been an active member in the community of the New Hampshire Free State Project. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a rundown on his bio here. So Dennis is the New Hampshire Liberty Activist of the Year. He was Cora's #1 writer on libertarianism, when he moved to the Free State 4.5 years ago. He has since become the consummate volunteer, starting the Liberty Clubhouse, the Shell opening the Independence Inn, offering Liberty bus tours, organizing events, and tweeting about the Free State. Twitter, his handle at Dennis Pratt Free, having redesigned PorkFest to more than double its size. This will be his 5th year volunteer to help lead it. Don't miss PorkFest XX 2023. Dennis studied psychology undergrad and computer science grad at Northwestern and business grad at MIT. His research was the design of new products in emerging industries. Besides homeschooling his daughter, he also started an organization for parents to take control of their child's schooling and an organization for personal growth that ran 250 events a year for 4,500 members in the Boston area. Coming from the left, he's been a libertarian over 40 years. He's been married a bit longer than that to his wife, best friend, and college dorm mate, Carol. They have one child, Vivian, and 2 dogs. His is named Ron Paw. So that's right on, Dennis. Actually, it's funny that the Carol name, that's pretty wild because Ron's wife is Carol as well, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyways, like I say, I'm just going to hand it over to Dennis there. Like I say, that's a great bio there, Dennis. And there's quite a few questions I have for you as it pertains. But if you want to even just start us off here, just give us a little more of a backgrounder in terms of what led you to becoming part of the Free State Project, and a little bit more in how that all played out.
Yeah, so I was a democratic socialist. About a quarter to a third of the libertarian movement in America comes from the left. It comes primarily from the right, but we do have very notable people who come from the left as well. And in 1981, I went through a very traumatic. It was traumatic for me and traumatic for my wife, I'll tell you. Transformation over to libertarianism. And I've been a libertarian since. I actually heard about the Free State Project around the same time that Jason Sorens wrote his proposal, which was 2002, basically saying, hey, why don't we, instead of trying to convert everybody, instead of trying to pretend that we're authoritarian light in order to grab the power of government and move it towards greater freedom, why don't we just collect all of the people who are really libertarian and put them in one small state and make that state our own? So I actually knew the general concept, but I discounted it as something that wasn't really, it wasn't really real. It wasn't really something that would work. At that point, let's see now. So that was almost, that was 2 decades after I'd become a libertarian, and I was going through my depression stage, and I had kind of given up that freedom was ever possible. Yeah. I had been bashing my head into the wall for 2 decades. So, and one of the person who let me know about it wasn't a libertarian. He was actually one of my socialist friends. So I discounted. And finally in 2011, I'd been hearing rumors about it. At that time we lived in Massachusetts. And it was my birthday. My wife was leaving for work on my birthday. She goes, well, why don't you do something that you want to do? Just go somewhere. And I said, well, I've always kind of wondered about this thing that's happening up north. So maybe I'll just drive up for the day, and that would be my big exploration for my birthday. So I went up, I left early in the morning. It's about 3-4 hours from Massachusetts to get up there. And it was a transformational experience going up to PorkFest This is June. My birthday is always on PorkFest, in the middle of PorkFest. And it was just so incredible because I had lived in New York City, in New Jersey, in Chicago, in Boulder, and Boston. These are all libertarian, liberal, progressive, authoritarian locations.
Right.
And I would try to explain this beautiful philosophy, this beautiful live and let live, this beautiful vision of how we could live together in peace, in win-win, in voluntary relationship, where consent actually matters. We don't violate each other.
Right.
I would try to explain this to people who kind of came from my background, from that left background, and I never could get anyone to understand. It was so frustrating. And all of a sudden, I was in amongst 1,000 people. It was about 1,000 at that time. 1,000 people who all got it, and they had different ideas around it, and they are all working towards actually creating an actual free society. And it was incredible. I called my wife up that night, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to spend the night. Really enjoying it, and I'm going to spend the night. So I'll be here one more day." And the next day, I was just, even more involved in it. I was so excited by it. And I called my wife that night, and I said, "Hey, I know I said I was be back tonight, but I'm not going to make it. I'll be here." So anyway, in that way, I spent the entire week at PorkFest. I went to a number of PorkFests. I'm actually now in charge of PorkFest. I now run PorkFest. I redesigned it in 2021, but I've been volunteering, in a coordinator fashion for 5 years now. This is my third year actually running it, but it's now gigantic. It's 3 times the size that when I went to it, but still got that feel of of lots and lots of people, thousands of people, believing that we can actually create a free society, and then actually trying to experience it. It's a simulation of a free village that crops up for a week. So I invite all of our Canadian friends up there. Please come down to PorkFest. You will love it. I would love to see a hub. We have about 100 different hubs. Like, for example, Montana had a hub last year, and Vermont had a hub last year. And I think we had Pennsylvania having a hub, and Wisconsin having a hub. But we also have Christian hubs and atheist hubs, and we have knitting hubs and all different types of hubs where people just do all these different fun things. I'd love to see a Canadian hub. Bring down some bacon.
Well, that definitely sounds good to me. And actually, I did want to ask you more about the PorkFest, because that sounds like a really interesting event and something that I would like to see actually get replicated up here in New Brunswick. And maybe not just for New Brunswick, but like I say, we kind of close knit in terms of the Atlantic provinces here, and it's quite easy to travel back and forth amongst them. So something that would be good for the entire Atlantic provinces. But anyways, before that, so you mentioned early on, which was quite interesting, because I'm definitely very much familiar, and I'm pretty sure it's along the same lines in terms of America and Canada, in terms of the left and the right, in terms of the conservatives would be a Republican, and here in Canada, like a liberal would be a Democrat. But you said actually, so you don't even have, because what I found myself personally, I would have as a young man, not really into politics or anything, but I would have definitely considered myself a liberal. But the more I realize what the people who identify as liberal today, I would say, that's why I would say a classical liberal. So in the classical sense of what a liberal would have been, and here in Canada, in the political realm, that would have been someone that typically would have been considered like a Chrétien type figure, or Paul Martin. Not sure if you're familiar with any of the former prime ministers of this country, but very open in terms of social policies, but at least somewhat fiscally restrained, and so that would have been the classical liberal. But you say you actually come from the background of a democratic socialist, so that would mean, now when you say something like that, the first thing I think of off the top of my head is, so like Bernie Sanders is someone that identifies as a democratic socialist. So for those of us in Canada, or anyone else that is listening is not familiar with maybe the term democratic socialist, where would you place that now in terms of, so classical or liberal, what would be the distinguishing difference between someone who would be, they would say left in terms of a classical liberal, but the difference between a democratic socialist and someone like a classical liberal? What would be the difference there as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard because the left-right continuum doesn't really make that much sense, especially to libertarians.
No.
For us, the more interesting dimension is kind of a libertarian authoritarian dimension.
Yes,
that goes kind of north and south.
Right.
And so you can be kind of down in the authoritarian realm. You can be you believe that you don't own your body, that there's a ruler that has a superior ownership over your body and may make laws to how you use your body, what you ingest and what you take out from your body, with whom you associate your body, how you labor your body and leisure your body, and what you do with the sweat and lifespan of your body and labor, the product of your of that. So that's down here in the authoritarian realm, and some people have these ideas for what they want to do with your body, and other people have these ideas of what they want to do with your body. As you kind of move up in the libertarian space, though, into more and more libertarian space, the libertarians are saying, really, you own your own body. It's you who gets to decide what you do with it and how you move it and how you labor with it, how you leisure, with whom you associate it, and and the product, when you spend your sweat and labor and time and energy and to build something, who owns it? Well, it's you, because it's it's your part, your body that's actually produced it. So now once you're up here, you can still have kind of leftist viewpoints, but you're not using the state to impose them. These are like the things that you're concerned about, and you're worried about these types of things. And similarly, you could have kind of conservative viewpoints, but you're not going to impose it on other people. It's actually really interesting, Bennett. Here in the Free State, we have so many thousands of libertarians that we have people from all different types of personal preferences. And so you have enclaves of fairly personally conservative people. Now, they share the libertarian ethic that they're not going to use violence to impose it, but they're not going to associate with a lot of the more progressive people. We have progressive people who, again, they have progressive views. They think, a lot of things that progressives do, except they're not going to use violence, not personal, nor through the proxy of the state. So now, where does classical liberal fall? So democratic socialists would be way down here at the bottom, and way over on the. So it's your right and not okay. So
on that political compass there, the four quadrants of the old political compass.
Yeah. There, so they are. So when I was a democratic socialist, I had no. A lot of people will deny that the government is an instrument of violence, and that it's trying to impose through threatening your life in order to obey your rulers. A democratic socialist goes, yeah, of course, that's what we're doing. So I had no problem with that part of libertarian thinking. It was like, yeah, of course that's what we're doing, and we want to take your guns so that you can't fight back. Of course,
So you were actually conscious of that fact, that it wasn't just the fact that you wanted these things to happen. You actually even understood like how that happened.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I mean, Mao talks about how authority is through the point of a gun, and so and of course, I mean, we were looking to wrest government in order to impose our will, our preferences through the violence of the state on those deplorables. I mean, we wouldn't have used those terms. We would have used I forget what types of terms we would have used, but the horrible people who don't think like us and ought to think like us, and we'll use violence, the violence of the state, in order to force them to do that. So so to us that was just of course that's what we do. It's so funny talking to progressives now, because they pretend that government is not an instrument of violence, and they're going, well, no, it's just the community coming together. I go, well, okay. And if somebody disagrees,
Yeah.
what happens? Well, we tell them that there's a law. And I say, okay, if they still disagree, well, then we'll fine them. And if they won't pay the fine, and you have
Mm.
to walk them through until they murder you. And they go, oh,
Yeah.
but that never happens. Well, yeah, it does happen. And it's actually what is at the end, the government is telling you, you will obey your ruler for what you do with your body. Otherwise, we will murder you.
Right.
And so a libertarian kind of, so I didn't actually have to change that part of my views.
Mm.
I didn't, and what I had to actually come to was that is a very unethical way of treating
Yeah.
another human being. That is treating other human beings as though they are your slave.
Right.
And so it was that turned me in 1981 to kind of go, oh my God, it took about 9 months, Bennett, of really hard work and thinking and, kind of coming to Jesus moments and,
Yeah.
realizing, oh my God, that's really inconsistent, isn't it? And, I just, until I finally got to the point, and I didn't have a name for it when I came to libertarianism. I didn't know anything about, this freedom movement or anything like that. I hadn't
Right.
been exposed to it. I was working with another guy, and we kind of derived this ourselves. We thought that we had invented something new.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you look out there, typically, though, it would probably seem something new because that's kind of what I've experienced in my life. And I got to tell you, as a Gen Xer and one of the like a little bit on the older side of the Gen Xers, one thing that stood out to me growing up, and not knowing anything about politics, especially as a young man or a child, is whether it was people from the religious community, because my family, especially on my mother's side, was quite religious, and or then even if you're talking in the secular realm or the state in terms of going to school, there was what really as an adult that drove me. Now there was a bunch of events that happened in between that, but drove me towards trying to learn about liberty. And once I learned about it and started hearing about people like Ron Paul when he was running for election, it really piqued my interest. Was even as a young man, it drove me nuts as a child to see people that was not only was it the might make right, but it was literally, I remember in school, I threw a snowball up in the air. We were trying to have a little competition to see who could throw the snowball up in the air to see who could throw it the highest. And mine happened to come down. This was like, I think it was when we were still in the kindergarten to grade 3, so quite young. And anyways, one of the snowballs come down and hit a girl on top of the head. It was a snowball, it wasn't a piece of ice or anything, but I ended up getting strapped, and strap was still a normal thing when I was a kid, that you get strapped on your hand, you get sent to the principal's office, and the principal would strap you with an instrument, whether it was made of leather or rubber or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, so as a kid, not as critically as I would as an adult, but thinking, so I'm getting in trouble. It was an accident that I hit this girl, but the remedy of me apparently hitting this girl with the snowball is that you're going to beat me. So the lesson I'm learning here is, you shouldn't hurt other people, but I'm going to hurt you. So it was just, and it was just so much contradiction. And then I would have people that would be considered, well respected members of the community that, have a lot of instance where they're caught going to church a lot. So they were known as someone that frequented the church, but you would find out, and it didn't take long in a small community, the guy's cheating on his wife on a continuous basis, right? So to me, it was just this nonstop walking, talking contradictions. And even in the might makes right realm, well, it seemed to only work, and especially as a young man that gets to grow into an adult, well, apparently might is not right anymore if I become stronger. So it was just the constant hypocrisy. And that to me, whether you take that from I do kind of have a background of, because of my father building engines and kind of an engineering, kind of a problem solving kind of a background. And to me, that was a big thing is, okay, when you're talking about ethics or dealing with people in the social or economic realm, there has to be some grounded principles in these things. Otherwise, how do you figure things out? And of course, having my own sons, how do you teach or raise your sons? When you're just like, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to raise my sons to have, clear and concise minds and their concepts and the principles that guide their decisions. And libertarianism in combination, I will say there were some aspects of Christianity that I definitely, hold dear, some of the things, but there was other areas were terrible. But libertarianism to me was the thing that said, okay, even if you're a secular person and you don't want to get into religion at all, right? It is the one area where the principles are so simple and things that, like, even as a child, you understand, right? Don't hit, don't steal, right?
Mhm.
Don't take other people's stuff, kind of thing. And respect for people's self-ownership and their property rights. And that, to me, once you extrapolate that out to every aspect of your life, it just, well, I mean, it's the best relationships you're ever going to have in your life are when they're done on the voluntary means. And that's the thing, like I say, and I come from, like I say, that liberal background. I've known people that, like you say, are right wing, or conservatives come from conservative backgrounds. But yeah, like even socialists, or I've known people that are anarchists, communists. A lot of the time I found is just people that have been, raised under that kind of mindset where it's just contradictions were as normal as breathing. So it wasn't a whole difference for them. But I find myself really intrigued and I'm massively appreciative of people, not just like yourself, but others who have worked through all this stuff over the course of their life and figured this stuff out, and now is actually helping to better explain and educate others, while at the same time offering a real world example. Because another thing, as libertarians, we're all probably quite familiar with is, well, where's this libertarian society, right? If it's so great, well, it's actually,
Here, right
right.
here.
Exactly. So yeah, we're no longer have to rely on, have to resort to looking back in, like, maybe some Irish history, right? For someone. No, you can actually, right.
Iceland.
Yeah, or Iceland, right? No, you can actually look right now to examples, and that is something that's really important to me. That liberty truly is a state of mind, and if you can create enough people, at least in your local community, you do have the best chance of living as free as humanly possible. Doesn't mean that it's always and forever going to be perfected, but that's not the point of libertarianism. The point of it is just at least give people the understanding of what it is, and to show how beneficial it is to everyone involved. But anyway, so back to what you were saying. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant there, but the one thing, like I say, that I wanted to ask in terms of the Pork Fest is, you didn't start it, but what was it? Just an event that they started years ago? Like, give me a little bit more of the background on how that Pork Fest, started, and what caused so much interest, because obviously it's something that's quite popular today, right?
So Jason Sorens wrote this short paper. It's less than half a page almost. It's just saying, hey, the Libertarian Party has been around for, I guess at that point it was 30 years. That hasn't made any progress, and it won't make any progress. I will wager that in 20 years it still will not have made progress, because it faces this systemic problem. What we should do instead is pull everyone who is libertarian into one state. Well, a bunch of people, this was early, pretty early in internet, and there were a bunch of people who saw this and, raised their hand and said, hey, count me in. And so all of a sudden, Jason found himself kind of in charge of a movement here. And the first question was, well, what state? Which state should we choose? So they went through this long process of trying to choose a particular state. And one of the things that New Hampshire did was we threw a festival up in the White Mountains, the gorgeous White Mountains, and it was called Escape to New Hampshire. And the idea there was to entice the libertarians who were going to be voting on this idea of where the Free State Project would be up into the White Mountains. And there they could fall in love with the beauty of New Hampshire. And we could make the case that New Hampshire is actually, as the freest states already, this is really the place that we ought to be looking at. There are a lot of other criteria for it: population size, access to governance, but certainly the current ethos of New Hampshire. We were New Hampshire was Massachusetts oftentimes gets cited as the first state in revolution. New Hampshire had them beat. Massachusetts just has all the historians.
yeah.
So that was we call that, or I call that, and as other people call that. I was corrected the other day by one of the old guard. I've never called it this, but anyway, we call it Pork. That's Pork Fest 0. Escape to New Hampshire is Pork Fest 0. It was successful, and they selected New Hampshire as the state to go to. Everyone said, okay, we'll get 20,000 people to sign up. And then we'll all move to New Hampshire, and there we will try to build what I call a libertarian homeland there. And then the next year we threw PorcFest 1, which was a celebration of that escape to New Hampshire, and that New Hampshire was actually now the Free State project. So that was the origin of it.
Well, just a real quick question before you continue on. So would this have been at someone that had their own private property? I would assume that, and is that event been held in the same area? I guess where I'm getting at is where did the people tend to, or someone obviously must have agreed to where they're going to hold the venue at, or whatever, right?
Yeah. I'm not too sure where they held the first one. I'm sure that there are people who can tell you that. I wasn't involved, right? I was just discount. Oh, poo poo. So I was certainly a non-believer.
Right.
So I don't know. Right now we hold it at the Rogers Campground, which is the largest campground in the state. Okay. And it's we actually take over all the hotels and bed and breakfasts and Airbnbs and people's homes and people's backyards for about 30 miles around. So it's that large now. So it's not just the campground. It's a gigantic festival.
Yeah, and I suppose that actually probably helps generate some revenue for the locals around.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny because every once in a while we'll get so we're called Free Staters. And I call the people who really detest us. They're usually progressive authoritarians. They're really having a miserable time because all those laws that they put in, we're slowly pinking off.
Yeah,
they're getting so upset. We'll all die if we don't have that law, So anyway, I call them the free haters.
Right.
So there's free staters versus free haters. And the free haters, oftentimes, we've had a couple of people who weigh in on the PorcFest boards, and they'll say, "Oh, we hate you guys, but come and spend your money here for sure. We'll take your money." And we're like, you don't have to love us, that's okay. And we'll certainly, if you have good product, we'll certainly buy your product and that type of thing. But I mean,
well, that's the other thing too. And speaking of the products and stuff, and the fact that you are generating revenue, another major aspect, and that's something that we're definitely going to have to, make a emphasis or a point to prioritize here in New Brunswick, is getting businesses, right, that are willing to have that live, let live mentality and that more of a free market type of mindset. So I noticed on your website or the Free State Project website that was it, over 120 or more businesses that apparently that you guys have actually started up in there, that's a big thing right there. So maybe do you have any information that you can help us in understanding is what was it? I mean, other than the fact I'm obviously well aware that probably a lot easier to entice business owners to start in New Hampshire, whereas there's you don't have a lot of the taxes that unfortunately we do here in New Brunswick. But was it the taxes alone, or what other benefits or factors were involved in enticing these companies to start businesses up in New Hampshire?
Yeah, just to be clear, it's actually there's a guy who's always yelling at me going, "We need more businesses," and I go, "We need more libertarian businesses. We need more businesses that are run by libertarians for libertarians with a libertarian ethos to hire libertarians. That's what we need." If we had a whole bunch of authoritarian businesses come here, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start lobbying for more laws with the government in order to protect their businesses, right? We know from public choice theory that businesses will look to government to try to get rent, right? But economic advantage by conferring some sort of monopoly advantage through law. And we don't want that. So our businesses tend to be kind of homegrown. I started a community clubhouse here. I started an inn here where I was part of. I set up a consortium here to purchase an inn, and we have it. Come down and stay. DM me, and I'll give you a good deal. But that's called the Independence Inn, and it's a good place because you kind of hit multiple regions in the southeastern area when you come down to investigate the Free State. But it's that type of thing. We go out and luckily the people in New Hampshire are already fairly libertarian. I mean, the progressive authoritarians tend to have come from New York or Massachusetts, or they're kind of transplants. They ruined their states. They move over here, and then they go, "Oh, what would be really good are all these laws." And you go, no, you're just going to ruin everything. And so they've actually, they were turning the state, just kind of into a Massachusetts lookalike, and it upset a lot of the natives who were kind of homegrown here. I think we've done a good job of turning that tide back. We're the only state, I think, that is moving in a libertarian direction. The other states, the states I call the authoritarian 49, they're moving pretty much towards greater authoritarianism, towards greater enslavement to the rulers, whereas we are actually pulling laws off. We're pulling taxes off. We're reducing taxes. We're reducing regulations. We're reducing reporting. We're freeing up a number of things. We're the number one crypto state in we have a lot of businesses that accept crypto. We're the second state to actually have our own gold back, which is pressed gold in a kind of a paper form that you could actually use, but it's got gold in it. And we trade in that. So we trade in silver and in gold and crypto. We do trade also, of course, in dirty fiat. So we're doing so much in terms of parallel institutions. A lot of people think that the Free State Project is really just about the politics. And I would say the politics occupy maybe about 15% or 20% of our efforts. So much of this has to do with building up parallel institutions. Our community clubhouses, that's really kind of where I spend my energies around, building those up so that when people come, and this migration has been really hard. I'd like to make sure that we talk just a little bit about how hard this migration is. Because I know that you guys are thinking about doing something like it, but it's not costless. But it's so hard because people come here pretty much alone. Libertarianism is not something that crops up in a community. So there aren't communities that are libertarian. Mormon migration to Utah or Jewish migration to Israel, those were a lot easier. Gay migration even to San Francisco. Those are a lot easier migrations because a lot of times it's a community that forms somewhere else and then they pick up and come. And so they already have their ties and their businesses and their connections and stuff. Libertarianism crops up so individually. One person probably be the only person in their family, in their neighborhood who's libertarian. And now he's got to make his decision. I'm going to move to New Hampshire because I want to be around other libertarians, but that means I have to leave all of these relationships. Now, I argue those relationships are inherently broken because all those people think of you as being tax cattle, as being their slave through their ruler, right? So, they're not going to slave you directly, but they will vote for a ruler who will then threaten you with death in order to enslave you. And I don't think that that's a good basis of a relationship.
No,
I
most
think I think the relationship needs that foundation of
yeah,
I will honor you, I will honor your self-ownership, I will respect you as an individual, and I will not be using violence my own or through the proxy of a government. So, but they have to make that decision to do that. And one of the ways that we ease that is by having a lot of social events and a lot of community centers. And I'm leaving today to go up to another community center. We're starting up north, almost at your border, by the way.
okay, yeah,
Um, and so when you come here, you actually are ensconced in one of the most vibrant communities you've ever experienced,
nice,
and they all agree on that basic ethic that beneath which
yeah,
you're evil, right? If you start using violence against somebody in order to
yeah,
enslave them, that's where evil lies. Now,
right,
on top of that, because we have so many thousands, personal preferences and cultural and tribal things. You could have a conservative group or a stoical group or a religious group or a group that is really entrepreneurial. So we put all these things on top of that, but that bedrock is
yeah,
there, and so it's a high trust community. It's a community where your reputation really matters in the community.
yeah,
It's a community that looks at how are you treating other human beings? Are you treating them respectfully, or are you treating them like a psychopath?
right.
Because libertarianism is pretty much the opposite of psychopathy.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're talking about the wide range, one thing I really like about a lot of people with the philosophy of liberty and the principles at the core of their thinking is, like you say, they're so diverse because really at the end of the day, it's the baseline is just, we've agreed that, yeah, we're not going to use preemptive force or violence or coercion or theft towards each other. But other than that, yes, and as someone that was born and raised in New Brunswick, which is very, very, especially when I was growing up, very homogenous type communities, right? Cookie cutters of each other for the most part. But my parents moved because of lack of work in the early 80s here on the East Coast, a lot of mills and stuff that got shut down, but moved out west to a place like Ontario in the east end of Toronto, where I was just confronted head on as a young man, 12 years old at the time, with genuine diversity of like people, like I say, of all different backgrounds. And one thing I learned now in these small communities, like I say, very close-minded typically, very cliquish. But because I, was raised and as a Gen Xer kind of, at that time and then going into my teenagers, very much raised as a latchkey kid, I got to explore all this on my own. And, I actually met up with tons of different people with a lot of different, not just like skin color in terms, but I mean, even, their background in terms of their culture. And what I learned, which was amazing for me as a child, was some of the things that people told me, the stereotypes, there may be some loose representations of those stereotypes, but at the individual level, what I learned as a young man is, to appreciate people from all, not just the food. The food's an easy thing, but just different aspects of what they bring to the table in terms of some of the cultural norms or historical aspects from where they come from. And I really learned to appreciate that. And that's one thing I like about libertarians is a lot of times, and you've probably heard this many times yourself, is you'll get accused. I get accused of by right wingers as being a lefty and from left wingers. And that's the beautiful thing, because that means you can't just pigeonhole me or people like yourself quite so easily. And I actually genuinely do, without trying to put on some kind of virtue signaling here, but I genuinely do appreciate diversity among people in terms of what they see as beneficial to them, because I look at it just like in the economic realm. The more competition, the more areas of difference you see what works best. That's kind of the beautiful thing about competition, not in terms of going button up heads against each other, but having different competing areas and interests in your life, whether it's social or economic. And like I say, what appeals to some, good for them. And a matter of fact, the way I've looked at it in life, and it's worked out in my own personal life, is actually the more you allow people to do as their own, as long as they're not using force or violence, the less chance you yourself have to be constantly looking over your shoulders, right? The more you adopt the live, let live mentality, and the more people around you do that, well, then that's actually how you live in an actually genuinely free and prosperous society. I know that in my own personal life, in my own, even with my own children. Now, I am very fortunate that I got into this stuff rather early and raised both of my sons with this mindset. So I actually kind of fortunate. My wife, myself, both of my sons, I would say, my brother, my stepfather, we would all, if you asked all of us, we would all say that we're, libertarians at heart. So to me, really what it comes down to, it's strange that we have to put on these labels, but that is, to understand these things, we have to use words and terms, right, to kind of explain these things in our mind to give more clarity. But really what we're talking about when you're talking about libertarians is just people that have a live, let live mentality, and the fact that they're diverse, not just in their thinking in the social realm, but in the economics means, amazing things that we'll get access to in that realm. But anyway, so when you're talking about these businesses, I wanted to ask you about this too, because and in terms you were saying you can use gold, some gold money and some silver, and those are definitely great things. And I talk about that stuff from time to time too. How none of our modern money, the currencies we use today, is anything representative of an actual commodity. Pennies used to be made of copper for a reason, right? Because copper actually had value, and all of our coinage that was silver, because silver actually has a value. Whereas now with the fiat currency, well, we don't have to get into that necessarily. But my biggest thing is can we kind of talk about some of the agorism and the alternative forms? Because I also think too, especially now with people having the bank collapses now at front and center, right? That people are going to think, well, what if that scenario that we do get to the point where the fiat currencies are, whether you're talking about like hyperinflation in like Weimar Republic, who's to say, but at any point in time, if the currency does break down to the point where you're having massively devaluation in even comparison to what we're experiencing now, it seems like in a place like New Hampshire, you're kind of already set up, or at least a substantial portion of the people in those communities are set up that, no matter what happens in terms of the fiat currency realm, because businesses and people that live in that state have found alternative ways to, use things as money, as a medium of measuring value, of exchanging value, of retaining value, is that seems to me very important, because then there's a much easier transition. I remember something as simple as my grandmother telling me as a kid, she grew up in, like I say, a farmhouse, more or less, right? Had your own property, had your own animals, your own vegetables. And when you talk about the Great Depression, it's like, what Great Depression? My life was almost the exact same in the late 1920s and early 30s in terms of her personal life, right? Because they grew up on a farm, mostly self-sustaining, relying on members in their community, and it was the same thing. Now, the people in the big cities noticed a huge difference, right? But that's the thing to me is, so can you give any advice, or what are the things that the people in New Hampshire have done to prepare themselves for any potential outcome where, the fiat currencies are no longer reliable in terms of your economic transactions, or any other possible ways of exchanging economically amongst each other?
Yeah, people come up here with very different types of views. So we have people who come up and they think that guns are really important, and there's a lot of gun groups, and then there's people who come up here for farming or homesteading. We're actually, like I said, we're going to be headed up north, and we're going to be going and staying at one of these homesteads up north. And they're doing a giant maple syrup, making thing over this weekend with all the libertarians, and the whole community is coming together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to that. But then there's also, we have so many people who are into alternative schooling and homeschooling, where it was funny as COVID started shutting down the schools, and all the non-libertarians were going, "Oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?" The libertarian moms here were going, "Oh, we told them, they should have listened." I go, "This is your opportunity, gals." Yeah. They're finally open to thinking about it. I mean, because we've been doing this for years. I was homeschooling my daughter back in the aughts. So we know these things. We have emergency ham radios groups that meet, and I actually have a ham radio over here that I don't know what to do with, but I bought one just in case. We have so we have so many different groups who are interested in different aspects. And what's really nice about this is, we have that political part which everyone gets all excited about because we're
Hmm.
reducing taxes and reducing regulations and this picayune law we're getting rid of, and this picayune law we're getting rid of, and then we're going, hey, why shouldn't the people in the Granite State be able to state whether they still want to be subjugated by DC? Why don't we have that vote every single year? How about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So we brought that to the state house, and of course the authoritarians go, oh, we can't do that. We're not allowed to do that. Our masters will allow us to do it. I'm going, hey, you're supposedly Democrats. This is a democracy. So, okay, let's check and see, do people still want to be subjugated to those people? So anyway, so there's so much going on in the political realm, but it's a small fraction of what it is that we're doing. I don't do anything in guns and crypto. I do a little bit in, maybe sometimes in metals and things like that. I don't do homeschooling anymore, even though I'm pretty much of an expert because I actually ran a group that taught around that. So I'll give some talks about peaceful parenting and that type of thing. Farming, I grew up in New York City. What the heck do I know about farming? I go up to these guys' homesteads and I cannot believe the industriousness of these people and what they can do. It is just so amazing to me what they can do without union metal workers. So there's all these little enclaves and groups that are of people being so industrious and creating all these fabulous options. And that's one of the reasons why we have Pork Fest. I mean, Pork Fest is primarily an outreach to people who are thinking, oh yeah, I really like this liberty thing, but it's not really possible, is it? And what we do is we come together in this little libertarian village and we go, hey, what if you could buy your food here and you could sell this here, and you could sell anything that you want and buy anything that you want, and work together and share information. We'll have over 1,000 events. Some of them are talks, like I give a lot of 101 libertarian talks, but there's debates and discussions, but there's a lot of also just demonstrations or just people gathering together. We had a couple of years ago, the women just basically put on the schedule, kind of a time where they could get together with their kids and just be knitting. There was a knitting circle. Well, it worked so well. They were doing it all the time throughout Pork Fest that they spun it off, and there's been a group now in Manchester called Stitch and Bitch. And they meet on a regular basis in Manchester. And we're looking at it from the seacoast where I live, and we're going, oh, that's so good. And one of the women here started a group it's called Crafty Bitches now. And that's how like these ideas kind of germinate and get tested out. Pork Fest is kind of a little laboratory where you can kind of go and say, ooh, that's a good idea. Or what if let me try this and see what happens. And I urge people, when they come to Pork Fest, try things out, give a talk or do a demo or whatever it is that you're interested in. There's David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son.
Yeah.
His daughter comes up and gives Renaissance dance lessons. And I went to the tent that they were doing that, and sure enough, they had 2 lines of doing Renaissance dance. I was going, wow, that's incredible. There's costume making and just all different types of things. We've had people leave that, test out their food and then leave and start up restaurants. We've had people make connections that led to businesses and other endeavors, and that's really what we're looking at. We're very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
If you think of libertarianism, my area of research was startups. How do you design new products, and primarily in the really hard area of new industries? Libertarianism is one of the most important startups of all time. We've had 6,000 years of a monopoly of slavery to the rulers. And
Right.
so we've always thought that that's the only way we can be. So now we're trying to start this idea of, well, what if we actually were free human beings and we could live our lives as we choose, and we owned our own lives and our own labor? What might that look like? And then because we would do that, we actually would be free to start up all these businesses. So once you actually have a liberty society, it's kind of taking the cap off. So,
Right.
the rulers tamp down because it's all command and control, and
Yeah.
you cannot do anything without our license.
Mm.
What if we actually remove that? We had a great, you'll like this. Late one night in a legislative session, one of the Free Staters passed a bill to deregulate the beer industry in New Hampshire. And no one thought it would change anything. It changed everything. We've had 100 new startups of little beer
Oh.
places all over the place, and different types of brews, and it's those types of micro freedoms that where people don't realize, right? They don't realize that by putting the heavy hand of the state here, it retards growth. It stops innovation. It prevents people from creating new things. And then all of a sudden you pull this up and up blossoms this beautiful, expansive, innovative rush. And so, PorcFest is a way that we can kind of, try that out and show it. My hope actually is that PorcFest becomes obviated. We don't no longer have to do it because the Free State, you come to the Free State anytime, and we're doing it just all the time.
Yeah. Well, I can definitely. Sorry, I was just going to say I can definitely see the importance of something like doing a PorcFest though, and especially and particularly early on, because I'm just picturing in my mind, even whether it's New Hampshire or here in New Brunswick, unless everyone is going to move into literally into this exact same area, which, New Hampshire's not a huge state by any stretch, and New Brunswick's not a huge province, but it's big enough that there's lots of different jurisdictions and localities. You got your big cities and your rural centers. But the one thing about having something like a PorcFest is, it doesn't matter if you're living in northern New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, or anywhere in between. It does give you the ability that everyone can at least congregate together. And like you say, there's multiple of things that would be applicable in terms of better for your mental health, even if you surround yourself by people that aren't the type of people that want to micromanage and control every aspect of your social and economic lives. And like you say, the picking of each other's minds in terms of ideas or business concepts. So I could definitely see that. And I think actually, like you're saying, the more of those kind of events it does, because that is the one thing libertarians typically, like you were alluding to earlier, would be the kind of people who are maybe not as socially, or some of them at least might not be as socially active as others, maybe more individualistic themselves. But it is something that I think is important that people have multiples of events that does at least create a sense of community, because that is one thing, no matter who you are, as a human being. And this is the kind of thing I don't know if you have yourself, but get into arguments with people when you're talking about individualism versus collectivism, or it's, to me, it's like they try to make it into a zero-sum game when I try to explain it's not individualism against the group entirely. It's just that the individual has to be the most important part of society, because we're all individuals, right? But of course, we all, as human beings, we are social beings, and we typically want to become part of some kind of a group, in some capacity, in some area of our lives at some time. And I think that is really, really important for libertarian communities, is to have that sense of being an actual community rather than just being isolated all by themselves. Now, I will ask, in terms of that, in New Hampshire, would you find I was watching one of the videos of another gentleman that was talking about it. So it looks like Keene would be seems like more like your progressive type of area, and that's probably one of your bigger cities, I would assume, right? So does it seem like there are certain areas or jurisdictions in New Hampshire that typical libertarians are congregating to, or are they sparsely or kind of spread out around the state?
Yeah, I mean there are groups of libertarians in a number of places, but we are pretty well spread out. I mean, certainly, in the cities, Manchester probably has the most libertarians per square mile.
Okay.
Um, and then if you're talking about real libertarians, that's only where I am. So there's only one. um, but it's interesting how uh, we actually intermingle quite a bit.
Right.
Um, Now, you're right that the libertarians at this phase of our diffusion into the general population, it's really hitting kind of the more intelligent, the more internally consistent, the more uh, 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 introspective, definitely introverts
Right.
are pretty are we're much higher, but that's just a function of diffusion curve. I'm a rarity, being one of the extroverts here.
Right.
We do have extroverts, but we're kind of few and far between.
Right.
Um, and but the extroverts are then in charge of creating communities and community
Mm.
clubhouses and things like that. That's what we do. That's what we like to do. And the introverts come in and they can kind of enjoy it, but then they can kind of go away and get their quiet time. Um, so we do have a diverse group of people here. They are spread out. We live in the seacoast, which is pretty progressive
Right.
here. The town I'm in, there's really no reason to run because it's all kind of run by progressive authoritarians. Now, of
Mm.
course, I want more libertarians to move here.
Mm.
There's a condo right down there if you guys are interested, and then
Yeah.
you get this view. Oops, did I lose
Nice.
you?
No,
Oh
that's
wait,
beautiful. Yeah, that's great. That's
then you get
beautiful.
this view.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. So yeah, so I would love to have more. There you are. I would love to have more libertarians move here, and we actually have a great group here just in my town. We meet once a week at a different restaurant, and then
Mm.
we retire to our community clubhouse for after dinner drinks and conversation and games.
Mm.
And that's just on Thursday nights. So every Thursday night we're meeting in different parts of the seacoast. And then we have debates there, we have discussions, we have movies, we play progressive bingo. So the free haters will oftentimes go out and they'll say how terrible we are and things like that. And so we watch it live stream, and then we set up bingo cards about what words they're going to use. And so we're all they'll call us some horrible name. We'll go we got it, and people will cross it off. So we have a good time with that. Did you by chance see the NBC documentary on the Free State?
Actually, it's a series. I watched the very first part of that series, and actually, I thought it was, obviously not going to get the best representation in terms of what, but I thought it was actually pretty decent so far. I haven't watched the rest of the series, but I'm definitely planning on checking them out.
Yeah, I highly recommend that you see it. It's actually done very well. We're gonna have the producer and chief photographer come to our clubhouse. We'll show the entire series there, and then they'll do a question and answer. But I remember early on, I was at Pork Fest and I was giving a talk, and they came in with their cameras, and I was like, going, who are you? Why are you miking me up? They were like miking me up as I was talking. I was go, I haven't actually given you consent to touch me, But I gave him this long lecture about not a lecture, but I just said, look, I understand you have a particular clientele, you have particular bosses. They are authoritarian. They need an authoritarian view on this. So I understand you're going to give us a big hit piece. And that's not we.
Right.
But they stayed with us for 9 months. embedded. And we actually
Right.
expected it. I mean, we get a lot. We get so many documentaries and articles done on us. Most of them are, the typical authoritarian dismissal of people who want to be free. That we
Mm.
can't build roads, and we don't know how to have a developed community. Right? We're
Right.
so individualistic that we don't have communities. We have
Right.
so much community. As a matter of fact, my argument is that one cannot have community unless one is a libertarian, because
Right.
anything else, when they're talking about community, they're really talking about almost like a prison camp with
Mm.
one person in charge and everyone must do what we say. And the communities that we have are live and let live, voluntarious. Oh, you're doing that? That's really interesting. I would never want to do that, but that's very interesting. I'm going to go over here for a while, So
Yeah.
there's a lot of association. I associate with these people because they fit better with the type of person I want to be. There's other people here, and so we have good boundaries, individual boundaries, but yet we're interacting and learning from each other, and we can hear differences without freaking out. Obviously, I've gone way off
Yeah.
topic. I don't remember what your original question was, and
On,
somehow I'm
on
over here
a,
talking about boundaries and
yeah.
how libertarianism is really an answer to narcissism.
Yeah.
That we are the least narcissistic political group because we don't try to force you to be like me. Right?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
the other groups are saying, oh, the way to be is just like me. And therefore, I'm going to pass a law that you have to be just like me. And if you don't obey the law, I'll kill you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go, really? Really? You're that narcissistic? Of course,
Yeah.
they don't realize that that's what they're saying, but that's how narcissistic they are. Whereas
Yeah.
a libertarian goes, hey, these guys are going to be different from me. I know that. I've always known that. I'm not scared by it. I'm kind of interested to hear their perspective of what they think life is like. But I have a good enough boundary that they can be they and I can be I, and I don't need to control their lives. I
Yeah.
can just go, oh, geez, that's interesting, or that's good, or boy, I wouldn't want to do that, or you guys stay away from me, all right?
Well, the one thing that really is, and it's really captured me, and that's why I'm kind of like doing this thing now, where I'm not just talking to some free state folks like yourself, but even getting really, hopefully, more actively involved with Mark and others in terms of doing this, replicating this in New Brunswick. Because if there's one thing that I've noticed is, especially for we libertarians in Canada, which are already, trust me, you want to talk about a minority, severely and highly outnumbered to a degree. I'm sure it's not even similar to even some of your more leftist states. But anyways, the thing is other than online activism, which I don't begrudge, and I've done it myself for over 10, 12 years, and I just say, listen, I'm taking advantage of the fact that we live in the age of information. If I lived when the time when the Gutenberg press was first invented and I was wealthy enough to buy books or have books printed, I would have been doing the same thing. So to me, there's nothing wrong with online activism and trying to reach out to as many people as you possibly can to hopefully help educate, inform, and talk about these kind of things. But it's the actual the boots on the ground kind of actual real world application that what you folks are doing. To me, that's something that should be very, not just endearing, but enticing to people who are disenfranchised with the current system or the status quo. Is it gives you that sense of meaning and purpose too, right? Where you're not just sitting around bitching about it, right? Like sometimes I even find myself getting a little frustrated where I feel like I'm like the old guys down at the local Irving gas station that just sit and chatter all day, not really of anything substantive, but just kind of gossiping. And sometimes I think, well, what can we do other than just talk about these things online? And to see you folks, it's so inspiring to see so many of you that are putting all these things to real world practice, right? And to be able to hopefully have someone like Mark that's already put in some groundwork. He set up a nice website for it. I'm not sure if you checked it, or anyone that's in the chat there, check it out, nbfree.ca, I believe it is. Let me just check here. Yeah, nbfree.ca. Definitely check that out. But like I say, the fact that you folks are actually doing this stuff and giving people, because even with someone like Jordan Peterson, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's not necessarily a libertarian. I would say he probably I think he historically probably would have identified as a classical liberal, but he's found himself in the conservative camp these days because of the whole shift in the Overton window. But either way, it's something that did obviously resonate, which to me kind of lends an area for us libertarians to an area where we can pick from. Is there's obviously a lot of young men in particular, but even young women as well, or even older ones, but definitely the younger crowds who feel not only disenfranchised, but pretty beat down and not having much to inspire them these days. And like I say, rather than picking up yourself by the bootstraps or cleaning up your room, as the way Peterson say, in terms of like just getting your own house in order, another thing that would be beneficial is to do that and help in your community or your locality, such as what you folks are doing with the New Hampshire Free State Project. And I think that's something that would be quite enticing to the younger people, and especially in particular the way you folks are doing it, like with things like Pork Fest, right, or having other events. That is something that they would already be endearing or enticing to young people to want to congregate to and be social creatures, while at the same time, doing the things that they need to in terms of actually creating liberty on the ground in their jurisdiction. So like I say, I really want to do whatever I can to help duplicate your folks' success. And I definitely wish and you've continued success and even more going forward, and hopefully expands to not just New Hampshire, but lots of other U.S. states. But I just want to ask you before I tie this up, is what are some recommendations or things that you think that you would be important as foundational for those of us who are trying to replicate what you folks are doing in New Hampshire? So what are some of the
the biggest problem that we had was we didn't know how long it would take to execute the migration. It turns out that it's a very hard migration to do. It's very hard to entice people to do. It's hard for people to entice people to even sign up. So Jason said, okay, well, we need 20,000 porcupines here. We're now around 65 or 6,500 here who have moved from out of state. And we have a lot of people in state who say, okay, I'm a free stater too, so, and we love those people because that's exactly what we want. So if you count us all up, you're maybe around 10 or 12K. But 20,000 is hard. And it's taken us 20 years to get 6,500 to move. Okay. So let's just put this in math. So Jason was thinking, okay, it'll take me maybe 5 years to get 20,000 people to sign up, and then another 5 years and they'll move, and then Swift Spot will be done in 10 years. Okay. So we're 20 years and we're really more like, a quarter to, 2/5 of the way of that. So that's been the hardest part of the prediction, because he was predicting from movements where whole communities were moving. And here we have this thing where individuals have to move.
Right.
And so much of it has to do with the infrastructure that we build up, which, I'm building up like crazy, but we have to have that infrastructure. Yeah. So now, so what's the number that New Brunswick would need? Well, New Brunswick is about half the population of New Hampshire. So let's assume that you'd have the same impact. In order to have the impact that you have here, you have the same structure, and I don't know what your governance is or anything like that. So let's say that you have half. So you only need 10,000 people to move. Okay. The trouble is that we're pulling from 330 million, and you're pulling from 38 million. So you have about 1/10.
Yeah.
1/10 of the population to draw from. Okay. So that means that, well, you only need 10,000, but and it's taken us 20 years to get our numbers. So you would need somewhere around 100 years to get to the impact that we're having. And that assumes also that you have the incidence of libertarianism that we have here in the States. And I think that we have a much higher incidence of libertarianism. It's still low. It's still really super low, but it's lower in Canada.
For sure.
So I appreciate people who say, oh, well, we're going to have a free state in Oklahoma. We're going to have a free state in Wyoming. Or we're going to have a free state. And I go, well, have you actually looked at what it's involved in this? It's not declaring it. It is a long, drawn out process where, I was talking to someone last night and he was talking about how many people. So we have about 6,500 who are here, but we've probably had somewhere around 15,000 who've been, come here and then left because
Right.
this is such a long process, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
The first people who moved here, most of them have left since because they're going, well, this is never going to happen. And I keep on trying to say, look, what model of diffusion did you have that thought that we could, on a dime turn this?
Yeah.
We can't
Yeah.
do that. We have so much history of authoritarianism, and trying to get the people out there to believe that we can actually make success. So a lot of our libertarians are extremely, they either still buy into that they can convert 100 million people.
Right.
I'm one of the best converters around, and my numbers would argue no, you can't. Or they're doing the camouflage thing of we're a party and we're not all that scary. We're just authoritarian light. No, we are an existential threat to authoritarianism. And thus, people who believe in the authoritarian state, who want the authoritarian state, who think that they will be on the ruler's side of authority, and they can make all those terrible people do exactly what we say, they want authoritarianism. And, we're not they. So, this concentration strategy is a new strategy. The best example is the Free State Project. It's a hard process. It's a long process. It requires a lot of diligence, a lot of work. How long would a place like New Brunswick, working with 1/10 of the population, a lower incidence of libertarianism, but requiring about half as many libertarians to move? My back of the envelope is about 100 years to get to where we are now. Okay, so 20 years it's taken New Hampshire to get to where we are now. It would take 100 years for New Brunswick to get to where New Hampshire is right now. So my strong recommendation is you guys congregate, and then as soon as we get that border north open, come back. We need Canadian libertarians here. Our best free staters come from other countries.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I classify our best free staters are the people who come from very authoritarian countries, and they flee, some of them halfway around the world to get here, and they have to fight immigration. They have to do all that type of stuff, and when they get here, they're serious. And we'll go, well, we'll give in on that point. They go, no, I did not travel halfway around the world for you to give up on that point.
Yeah,
we are here for freedom. It's like, okay, you're right. So they're really good. The women who come here are really, really, really strong. But we need more Canadians. We have a bunch of Canadians here, even on the seacoast. They are beloved, and some of them I speak French to. My poor pigeon French. So we do have some French speakers here, but we need more, and I think it's great because right now that border's shut down too hard. And we haven't figured out a way to set up an underground railroad, to get the Canadians to escape from your nightmare up there and back down into here. If we could ever figure out how to open up that border, you guys would actually already have a community and already have connections, and you could move as a coherent community like the Mormons did, right? The Mormons moved as coherent communities all around to Utah, right? And so they were able to do a much easier migration, much less stress, much easier to convince people. And so I could see where we could become, a significant part being Canadian. And eventually, if national divorce happens in the United States, which I do think, I don't think that we can stay at this level of hatred for people and trying to capture the central DC power and force everybody to be like them. And we're going through this big fight, and it's just continual warfare because they're authoritarians. They don't believe in the libertarian live and let live. So I think that they're going to break up. I don't know what's going to happen with Canada. Uh, maybe Canada would break up, and then we could actually form maybe even a little beltway. New Hampshire through northern Maine up into New Brunswick. That little arc. The crescent libertarian arc.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
I've
don't know what,
actually,
I don't know what the future looks like. I'm just my primary thing is have a little bit more respect for how difficult this
yeah,
is. And and you look at what the Free State is doing, you go, oh, we could do that, we could do that, it takes years and people and lots of dedicated hours and hours and hours of voluntary work. You're not getting paid for this.
yeah,
This is labor of love.
yeah,
I think it's so much easier to go to a place that already has all that infrastructure that
right.
we have developed over the 20 years. So we're urging Americans for sure to come, and anyone who can get here to come. If you've got any female Canadians who want to move here, we've got a lot of males. We got a lot of males.
Yeah,
And we will make a Canadian American love connection.
right
Uh,
on. Well, actually,
but
I've kind of joked around, but not well, joke, but kind of partially serious too. That well, with all this election interference going on up here in Canada from China and stuff, we're hoping rather than being overly predisposed or concerned with what's going on in Ukraine, yeah, we could if we were kind of taken over. Not that I'm a statist, but I mean, if I'm going to live on a plantation, to be honest with you, if I had the choice, I would choose to put up the white flag and be captured by the American state, because then at the very least we do have that freedom of mobility there, where New Hampshire and New Brunswick would at least be, in
yep.
the same country. But that is a serious issue for us Canadians. We fortunate, for me and for most people that I know, we were fortunate, especially I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I would imagine even my parents in the 50s and 60s. The American culture is quite dominant and has been for decades up in this country, because Hollywood in particular, and the music industry. But I have noticed quite the divergence, and there was always some divisions between Canadians and Americans, some animosity. But what I've noticed in particular in the last 10 years for sure is especially the establishment in this country are so anti-American these days. I find that it's disgusting. And I see the young people, especially that's going to school, and they're basically being turned against American. And the problem is, even some Americans are being turned against some of the American ideals. Not that, once again, and I'm a fan of the state in any imagination, but I do love, at the very least, in what most people, I remember growing up, we all cheered on the heroes, right? And that was the kind of the point of those movies or television shows, was the individual as the hero. Or even myself, growing up watching Star Trek, right? Whether you're talking about the Borg or Star Trek. Well, Star Trek for a Canadian, well, that was the Americans, right? And the Borg, well, that was the collectivist regimes in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that, like I say, but I don't see, especially now, there's even new iterations of these old shows like Star Trek, but they're not being reproduced with that same kind of principles or stories that are built behind them, which gave that kind of mindset of the American exceptionalism and individualism. So I do fear for my fellow Canadian citizens, which is why I think it's so important for me, is until we maybe the day may very well come where I might have to go to the U.S., but I would also like to, if I can, expand freedom and liberty in my own jurisdiction, because it's not the state per se, but these are the roots where my entire family and the history of my family are. And, it's kind of something that's near and dear to me in particular. So plus I'm a bit of a fighter myself. So I like the idea of accepting any challenge or rising to it. But I do see how it would be a definite benefit to have more of an American influence, which is why I think for me going forward, I'm going to be hopefully relying on, if you're not too if you're not too much against it, picking your brain and using people like your folks as an influence to kind of get my fellow Canadians about thinking about these things more critically, because it is very much more dominant in your culture. I've known that for a long time. I've said to many of my friends that I feel as a Canadian many times, especially now in recent decades, I feel like I was literally born in the wrong country, right? But it is what it is. I am who I am, and I'm like I say, I'm gonna try what I can. There's no promise, like you say, and it is a long-term project. I'll even just mention real quick a couple people even someone like Stefan Molyneux, who is a philosophical kind of guy and a thinker, is it starts at home and it starts at the kids. So not just in terms of the Free State Project, but I would imagine you agree with as well as the more people that we get together that are raising kids, might take a couple generations, but the more people that you raise with these philosophical ideas as it pertains to liberty, that also is going to expand in your community, the kind of people that are going to be more conducive to having that live let live mentality. So like I say, before I tie this up, just one more thing. Like I say, if you just want to even, obviously in the political realm, we're not going to worry about that too much. Although I will say in this province, we're kind of fortunate that not libertarians per se, but there are enough people in certain communities. So 3 of our local ridings actually voted for a party, not last election, but the one before that, which was called People's Alliance. It was just a small upstart party. It had no backing, like not a huge amount of financial backing. It was pretty grassroots, and they actually gained 3 seats in the legislature here in New Brunswick. Now, the main guy that started the party, he has crossed the floor, joined the Conservative Party, and basically disbanded the party. So someone else is trying to pick up the pieces now. But at the very least, like I say, there is a couple things that we do have in our favor in New Brunswick is there's a sizable portion of people in at least multiple ridings that are disenfranchised and willing to try something other than the status quo. And one thing I'll also add, because New Brunswick is a bilingual province, although you would never know it depending on what part of the province you're in, because if you're in the interior, that's predominantly English speaking New Brunswick, and the entire ring around the exterior is predominantly French speaking. But because a lot of those French speaking, especially up in the northeastern part of it, are Acadians, they're kind of disenfranchised in a multitude of ways, right? With not just the English speaking community that seems to jam everything down their throat, but like I say, they were quite independent type people. Anyways, as we know, a lot of them ended up down in Louisiana, right? And places as such. So there is at least some grounds that's available for libertarians to, because the philosophy is right, the principles are right, and it does give the ability for, whether it's the French speaking folks that just are tired of being ruled over by the English speaking community, right? Or even those in the English speaking community, but feel like they're completely disenfranchised because of the lack of representation. Like I say, it does seem that there's somewhat fertile grounds in this province where people might very well be willing to put their petty differences aside for the sake of, like I say, not for the other or not for any altruistic reasons, but just for them, so they can have peace of mind where they're not being oppressed, right? So like I get what you're saying, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to catch up to you folks down there at the Free State anytime soon, but I will say there is at least somewhat fertile grounds here, and I'm going to put in as much work and effort, like I say, with Mark and others, as many people as we can get to help with this, and hopefully I can reach out and pick your brains and a few other folks from the Free State Project as well, and hopefully get inspired and maybe get some lessons and some understanding of how best we can help try to replicate your success. And once again, I want to say, I hope you folks have not just the continued success and get your 20,000. I hope you fill that state up to the max, right? With libertarians, because that's really how it's got to start. It's got to start from there, and then hopefully it expands outwards, because we're really in a terrible state, but we have a lot of potential. That's one thing about living in this modern age right now that we're living in the moment. It's easy to get caught up in the bad things, the black pilling, but it's also easy, like Michael Malice is trying to do, in terms of pointing out the areas where you can get white pilled as well. So there's definitely positive signs. There's some green shoots out there, such as you folks and others that are trying. And I can't help but mention too, the more tyrannical the government's become, and this last 3 years in particular under the COVID lockdowns, I think, there's still people that are probably fence setters for sure, but there's probably at least a sizable portion, much more than prior to that, people are like, well, maybe I might want to look into this liberty kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to do the conversion route. I
Right.
think that the people who are now libertarian are just they have particular characteristics,
Yeah.
high logical consistency, willingness to seek truth and justice regardless of the crowd, right? Willingness to stand up to the mob, the social things, and even if everyone says nah, they go, nah, I don't care, you're wrong.
Yeah.
So there's a number of characteristics that are so important to actually be able to escape our indoctrination.
Mhm.
The United States has a lot of indoctrination. Yeah, so I have to say, in New Hampshire, we are not big fans of DC.
Yeah.
So the rest of the we talk about the authoritarian 49,
Yeah.
and it's like, we would love to have changed them. We would love to have had them kind of go towards that more American culture that you talk about, that's really kind of gone in America.
Yeah.
And in this one tiny little spot on Earth,
Mm.
this is where we're making our stand. This is where we're congregating, those of us who can. This is where we're building our own institutions, our own society. And it's based on peace, win-win, voluntarism, consensual relationships, all the good stuff. And I understand the authoritarians will hate us. That's just their nature. They hate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, if for all the folks that are watching, and we do get a bunch in the live stream there now in the chat, but I just want to mention you folks, whether you're in Canada, the US, because I do get, a fair amount of Americans that watch my stuff too. Um, definitely do what you can, right? Whether you're going to move there anytime soon, but I at the very least would implore anyone to at least check out, go to the Pork Fest, right? Even if you're a Canadian, I'm even considering myself, if I can get the time
No,
off.
especially if you're
Right?
Canadian. We want
Yeah,
Canadians.
yeah,
We
yeah,
love Canadian.
yeah,
Canadian libertarians, come down. Come
yeah,
and visit us. PorkFest, June 19th through the 25th. So that's
right on.
Monday through Sunday.
Yep,
Come down. I know that the head of New Brunswick Free Province is coming down. I'm
right
very
on.
excited about that. I would
Yeah,
like talks. Maybe you guys could set up a hub, just get a campsite and just create the
right.
Canadian hub and have
Yeah,
all different types of talks about New Brunswick, and
yeah,
what you're going to do, and invite other speakers to come and talk at your hub. But there's it's 1,000 events, 3,000 people, all liberty lovers, 100 different hubs. You're just going to have a great time. But if not that, just come and visit us. You
yes.
will be shocked.
Mhm.
I highly recommend you come stay at the Independence Inn,
Yep,
and then do one or two events in a particular region each day. Go to
right.
a different region, do one or two events in that region. We have events all over the place all the time. You'll meet lots of porcupines. You can talk to them about what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're excited about with, and by doing that, you'll see the breadth of what it is that we're doing. Um, and and uh, and it's pretty amazing. It's really amazing. It's very inspirational, and I hope that you'll be excited enough that you'll say, "Hey, maybe we can do something here up in Canada until that border opens, and then." If the border opens because the two countries dissolve,
Right.
we'll create our little corridor.
That's right. Yeah.
And if it just opens so that we can bring in good people,
Mhm.
people who actually believe in liberty.
Yeah.
We are very pro-immigrant here, very
Right on.
pro-immigrant.
Yeah.
Anybody who loves liberty, welcome to come here.
Yeah.
We already have lots of Canadians here. We want more.
Excellent. Well, like I say, you've already got me chomping and anxious to actually get down there because it's not that far away, and I could be down there in
It's
probably about 5 or 6 hours. I think is all it would
Take a
take. Yes.
drive. Yeah.
Yeah. So it actually does sound like something that I probably, rather than just tacitly admitting that I like to, I think I actually will make it a point this year to do that. I'd love to be able, like I say, to actually be able to talk to some of you folks live in person, and like I say, talk to maybe get some footage of some of the other events in the community. Like I say, just this is all stuff to help entice my fellow Canadians to think about these things more readily, and to get them, like you say, Yeah, if you're going to go take a vacation down in the U.S., why not stop down New Hampshire? I mean, not only you get to see all these great folks that represent the Free State Project, but I mean, New Hampshire is another one of those places. You don't have to pay your sales tax as a Canadian. Anytime you can get any kind of reprieve away from taxes, hey, that's all good and great as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, thanks a lot, Dennis. I really appreciate you coming on the live stream today. And like I say, I'm definitely be looking forward to hopefully having a conversation with you again at some point in time going forward. I really appreciate all the efforts that you folks, every one of you at the Free State Project, because I know how important it is. There's the folks at the idea people, right? Just like with the business, there's the idea people, right? That's represents usually a small amount of individuals, but then to make that idea come to fruition in the real world, it requires a whole lot of other people that are willing to come together and do that. And that is the beautiful thing, right? And the fact that we're doing all this stuff based on voluntary means, we're all inspired by the principles and the philosophy of liberty. And to me, there's just nothing that I can say that's bad about that. And especially when you put that up against, the rest of society that's headed fast paced, towards that cliff, right? It's so nice to be inspired by folks like yourself and projects like the Free State Project to give us something to strive for. Because like I say, those are the things that bring real meaning and purpose in your life, in addition to our families and the focus on the community. So thank you very much, Dennis. Thanks for everyone at the Free State Project. And we'll talk to you again at some point in time in the future.
See you on Twitter.
All right,
if
man.
Not, see you on Twitter. If not at the Independence Inn or the Pork Fest.
Or actually, before I do tie it up real quick, is there any actual event in particular that maybe you want to let anyone know right now in the stream? Maybe
we have Assange's family coming to the Shell this coming up Thursday. They're going to be doing that. We're doing the NBC documentary where NBC's coming and going to be showing the full document. Yeah, we have so many things coming. I'm moderating a debate on silver versus fiat versus crypto next. What is it next Friday or something like that? So yeah, I mean, we just have so many events, so many interesting events. It's hard to come here at a bad time because there's so many things happening. So I recommend, whenever your time is off, schedule a week in the Free State, and you'll be very much inspired. You'll be energized, and your mind will be going a mile a minute.
Right on. And all those events that you speak of, they can be found on the
Free State Project, fsp.org. fsp.org has our calendar. So if you go under calendar, fsp.org/calendar has all of our events that are open to the public. On top of that, there's probably another 10 times that of various organizations doing different things that are just more, that group is doing something or this other group is doing something. Once you get here, it's hard. We joke that the Free State Project, the biggest problem with the Free State Project is knowing what to do, because there's so many good things to do. You go, oh geez, maybe I will be doing this or doing that. Definitely look at the fsp.org. We have somebody at the FSP office. Her name is Chris Lopez, and she's in charge actually of making sure that your visit is good. So if you contact her at fsp.org and say, hey, I'm coming down April 18th or something like that, and I'm going to be here for a week. She'll make sure that you see the things that are on the calendar. If there's not something, if you want to visit the lakes region because you like the lakes and you're thinking that maybe that would be something cool, she'll schedule you to meet some of the porcupines up there if there's nothing on this schedule. There's so many things happening and people are so excited. We're always excited for reinforcements. Let's just put it that way. This is a long process. We know that we can't win it alone. And so we are always looking for more liberty lovers, especially builders, people who come with their list of, these are the things I want to do. These are the freedoms that are really matter to me. And I'm going to work on these. Those people are golden because the freedom is an infinite item. There's so many areas, and we can't, you can't rely on any one person to do them all. So we need people from all different walks of life, all different perspectives to come advance freedom in their area. And together we will create a freed society.
Beautiful. And anyway, so just to let the folks know before I tie this up, we're going to have the link to the Free State Project. That's going to be linked in the description of the live stream. And I also happen to have what you passed on to me earlier in the Twitter message, the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. So if you wanted to check that out as well, and it talks about the speakers that are going to be on there and some events. So I'll place
that was last week. So you missed out on that.
Oh, that was last week. Oh, okay. So is there anything else that's going to be linked on this that people could get information from? Because like I say, I was going to include this in the description.
Yeah, I mean, they should go to porkfest.com for PorkFest. That's our biggest event.
Okay.
I mean, and you will not regret going to PorkFest.
Excellent.
Guarantee you. And then and then, like I said, anytime you come, we have lots of things happening. FSP.org calendar. Talk to Chris Lopez. Stay at the Independence Inn. DM me on Twitter, and I'll get you a good deal at the Independence Inn.
Excellent. That's a perfect way to tie it up. But thank you very much, Dennis. You have yourself a great day. We'll talk to you again. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love